remember the difference between ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease.
It's not your fault. They're always taught the same way, a table of distinguishing features that you memorize and never really understand completely. I'm going to break it down for you as a pediatric GI doc. Remember distribution and depth. Classically, Crohn's disease can involve anywhere from the mouth to the anus. There's a macroscopic finding called skip lesions, which means you can have inflammation of one organ like the small intestine, an area of no inflammation, and then another area of inflammation in the colon. The most classic area that's skipped is actually the rectum. People forget perianal Crohn's disease is actually a known entity. Key thing to remember there is macroscopic. You do not see skip lesions on microscopy, you see them on imaging or endoscopy. The distribution of ulcerative colitis is very different. It always starts at the rectum and then moves proximally. That means spreads from the rectum to the sigmoid and then backwards. It always has continuous inflammation starting at the rectum. We see that endoscopically and on imaging. UC does not have to involve the entire colon. You could have proctocolitis, which involves the rectum and the sigmoid. You could have left-sided colitis. You could have pancolitis, which involves the entire colon. One of the key differences in distribution, the terminal ileum, the last part of the ileum. It's involved in Crohn's disease and it's not involved in UC. That's why when we do a colonoscopy for evaluation of inflammatory bowel disease, it's critical for us to go into the ileum to look for inflammation there. Remember, perianal Crohn's is an entity. We do not see anal inflammation in ulcerative colitis. Distribution helps you explain the symptoms you might see. So if you have colonic involvement, whether it's UC or colonic Crohn's, you will have what's called colitic symptoms, bloody stools, diarrhea, and two specific symptoms including tenesmus and nocturnal stools. Normally you feel the urge to defecate when the rectum stretches because of stool. Here there's no stool but inflammation that causes the rectum to spasm, sometimes overnight, sometimes normally, and then you get urgency, and then tenesmus, which is that feeling of needing to go but then nothing comes out. It's because there's no stool there. It's just spasm. Because of its distribution throughout the GI tract, I think about Crohn's when there are symptoms other than colitic symptoms. Dyspepsia or indigestion symptoms, burping, epigastric pain, postprandial fullness, early satiety or getting full after a couple bites of food, that could be gastric Crohn's. Significant weight loss, malabsorption, that could be small bowel Crohn's. Because UC affects only the colon, you generally don't see those symptoms unless there's something else going on. The next thing to think about is depth. Ulcerative colitis affects the superficial or mucosal layers of the GI tract. Crohn's disease, the inflammation can be transmural or extending through every single layer of the GI tract. I explain fistula and strictures because of the depth of inflammation. Fistula because the inflammation spreads out beyond the walls of the GI tract, and strictures because the inflammation spreads into the lumen. Or superficial inflammation in UC means you don't see strictures, you don't see fistula. And everyone says granulomas, which are pathognomonic for Crohn's disease, but we don't always see them. They're seen the minority of the time, and they don't really have to do with distribution or depth. They are a histologic or microscopic finding. There are so many nuances to the diagnosis and management of IBD. This is just for a general understanding as you're learning.